It's been a number of months now since Vermintide 2 officially launched, and in that time patches have changed the landscape quite a bit. So we're back with the beautiful Dwarven Slayer. The full legend guide I originally did for Bard and Slayer was back in 104, and since that time, changes such as a decrease in special frequency and increase in horde frequency, a flat 25 to 30% damage output reduction across the board, or specific weapon adjustments have certainly changed what I would now focus on with the Slayer. In fact, I think the Slayer is better than ever, and although it's still one of the more difficult classes to utilize properly, a good Slayer is easily one of the strongest characters to have with you, with a career ability allowing for fantastic utility through constant staggering, damage output and revives, and weapon and talent loadouts that make him an excellent, durable frontline character who can destroy elites and bosses alike. So with that in mind, I've spent a lot of time with the Slayer and have quite heavily changed my build around since that first 104 guide. A lot of the general approaches are still the same, and if you need a refresher when it comes to the Slayer basics, that would be the place to go. In this, I'll go over everything that's changed and the now new optimal build for Slayers, starting as before with our weapon loadouts. Our first weapon will be the Slayer exclusive dual axes. These are still one of the best weapons in the game and offer some of the highest melee damage outputs possible. They are by far one of the best elements of the Slayer, and no other weapon choice can compete when it comes to elite and boss clear speed. That said, practically every weapon Bardin can use has seen adjustments and buffs over the last few patches, so in theory you now have more options regarding his secondary weapon, and indeed, unlike before, the pickaxe and great axe are no longer terrible options, but they still aren't optimal. Dual axes easily beat any of these weapons when dealing with elites and bosses. They have the highest attack speed, they have the most dodge range, and with proper push attack utilization they have amazing kill cutoff points. Point being, the only reason for your second melee weapon is dealing with hordes. This certainly hasn't changed. As such, Great Axe immediately gets removed out of the running. The adjustments to Great Axe means it's now a more well-rounded weapon that offers, most of all, good damage output versus elites and bosses, with increased damage on the first heavy swing and further increased damage on the first heavy swing when fighting a boss. However, in neither of these circumstances does it beat the dual axes. With the Great Axe you can't reliably cancel fast enough, so you will lose out in comparison to the dual axes by going into the other attack patterns or by slowing down and forcibly block or swap cancelling to get back to spamming the first heavy. Neither is there any reason to pick this weapon if it singularly comes down to dealing with hordes. It's not a bad weapon to use against hordes, but it isn't optimal. Due to the attack pattern and the inability to quickly block and weave in push attacks, it's a very risky weapon to use against hordes, meaning you will likely take chip damage that you don't need to be taking. Moving on, the pickaxe still isn't good enough either. In effect, it's going to be a worse two-handed hammer. It has the same purposes as the hammer, because the heavy attacks are irrelevant, because once more they lose out to the dual axes, by far, but the only benefit they have over the two-handed hammer is that you don't slow down as much when using the light attacks compared to the two-handed hammer's heavy attacks, which are both the anti-horde attack patterns. Movement speed is very important, certainly, but you have to keep in mind that the two-handed hammer actually gives you a small forward dash every time you release your heavy attack, so for the purposes of moving back and forth while juggling a horde, the pickaxe actually loses out in this regard. Regardless, the main reason it's a lot worse is because, first of all, the damage output is going to be lower. It doesn't synergize with the dual axes to the same extent as the hammers will, which I'll go over in a minute, and because you have a much smaller attack arc with worse attack patterns, it's harder to hit multiple targets consistently, resulting in a weapon that is ultimately less safe to use and clears slower. In the end, we're back to picking either the two-handed hammer or the one-handed hammer, and for Slayer I strongly recommend the two-handed hammer over the one-handed hammer, despite this being a solid weapon as well. As a Slayer, you want to be using most of your stamina offensively. Dual axes have amazing push attacks that do the same damage as their heavy attacks, but don't cause any movement speed reduction, are easier to headshot with, are faster, and because they are following a push, they are also safer in the frequent scenario in which an elite is surrounded by one or two regular minions, which have a fair chance of hitting you if they already started up their attack animations. Essentially, you constantly want to be using your stamina for a dual axe push attack when fighting anything that isn't a horde. When you do then run out of stamina, the excellent part about the hammers is that you can quickly swap to these and do two light attacks in the case of the two-handed hammer, or two heavy attacks in the case of the one-handed hammer. This is a great quick swap technique to use when dealing with multiple Chaos Warriors at a time, for instance, followed by quickly swapping back to do more push attacks on the dual axes, of course. The main reason I would then highly recommend the two-handed hammer over the one-handed hammer comes down to the nature of how you deal with hordes on both of them. With the two-handed hammer you'll be spamming heavy attacks, which on the Slayer are an amazing way to deal with hordes due to your great attack speed. They're horizontal attacks that do solid cleave, amazing stagger, nowadays not enough damage to instantly kill horde minions, and importantly hit practically everything that's standing in front or slightly beside you. With the one-handed hammer you'll be swapping between spamming light attacks, which are very fast and deal good stagger but have rather limited horizontal range, and push attacks, which are necessary when a horde gets too close and starts surrounding you. Because stamina is shared between your weapons, this means that using the one-handed hammer often forces you to use stamina on push attacks to control hordes with, whereas in dire situations you'll find a horde contains a few storm vermin, a mauler or chaos warrior, and in those scenarios ideally you want to very quickly swap to the dual axes to snipe those when an opening presents itself, which you do with push attacks. This becomes more difficult to do with the one-handed hammer as you'll have spent that stamina on push attacks to control the horde. This is frankly the main reason I'd recommend the two-handed hammer instead at this point. In addition, it will also clear hordes faster, meaning you likely build up temporary HP faster, which is a very nice benefit. For the main trade-off being poor dodge range. However, in most scenarios, that's not much of a factor seeing as dual axes have top-tier dodge range whenever you swap to those. So, optimally for Slayer, you want to use the dual axes for generally moving around, clearing small groups, elites and bosses, and you'll swap to the two-handed hammer whenever you run out of stamina versus groups of elites, and mainly whenever you have to deal with a horde. Also keep in mind that the dual axes have very poor armor penetration on their light attacks, so if you are, say, fighting a Storm Fiend, you want to forego spamming light attacks in favor of push attacks and heavy attacks. Secondly, if you're using the two-handed hammer, use the time between swings, the time in which your enemies are knocked back, to quickly watch your back. Swing and quickly turn around while charging the second swing, basically. Moving on to talents, where not a whole lot has changed. At level 5, we'll now pick up Hack and Slash. Ever since damage output has been dramatically reduced, naturally it's become more important to focus on being able to deal enough damage to kill enemies fast. This 5% crit roll works excellently with your melee traits, and because of your rapid attack speed you'll be triggering these very often indeed. Stout Fellow is still a good talent, 25% more HP is never wrong, but damage isn't nearly as taken for granted anymore, and as such, at this point the 5% crit is going to help you out more than some extra HP will do. Lastly, See It Coming has received a significant buff, now up to 20% more dodge range, but because your best weapon and most commonly used weapon, the dual axes, already have top tier dodge range, there are essentially not enough relevant reasons to pick this over the 5% crit. At level 10 there's only one choice, Oblivious to Pain. Oblivious to Pain is one of the best durability talents in the game, reducing any damage to either 10 or half of its original damage, whichever is higher, meaning it now triggers on most attacks in the game, resulting in a very durable Slayer. At level 15, we'll pick Adrenaline Surge like before. This dramatically reduces the cooldown on your leap, which is of course used for dramatically more damage, very safe revives, or generally to stagger hordes. At level 20, we'll pick up Grudgeborn, the only worthwhile talent in this tier, giving you that amazing temporary HP on kill, and at level 25, we'll now stick to No Escape. Crunch isn't nearly as valuable as it used to be now that stagger values have been reworked. Without Crunch you'll still be able to stagger most things in the game, including Berserkers, as long as you land before they initiate their attack animations. Either way, 25% movement speed from No Escape is an incredibly useful and versatile upgrade because movement speed is of course intertwined with both defense and offense, allowing you to joust with enemies much better, circle around hordes, run towards allies, hit a special before they vanish or teleport, or simply so you won't feel as sluggish while spamming two-handed hammer heavies. An amazing talent, quite frankly. Finally, let's look at our item properties. For the dual axes, you want to get +2 stamina, which comes down to 1 stamina shield, but keep in mind that anything less than +2 stamina is virtually pointless. +2 stamina, or 1 full stamina shield, means you will be able to do 1 more push attack. That 1 push attack is going to dramatically help you clear groups of elites faster. With this, you'll increase your dual axe base stamina to 3 shields, and anything less than 3 will feel absolutely horrible. Secondly, you'll want to get crit chance to synergize with your swift slaying trait, which is by far the best trait to get. Not to mention, critical hits during packs of elites are a dramatic increase in clear speed as well. For the two-handed hammer, or the one-handed hammer if you so desire, you'll want to get attack speed first and foremost, followed by crit chance. Unfortunately, due to the damage nerfs, getting power versus infantry is now entirely pointless on these weapons, as it doesn't significantly help you clear hordes fast enough. Regardless, attack speed is very important for both safety and clear speed when dealing with hordes, and crit chance yet again synergizes with your weapon trait, swift slaying, which you also want to get in your hammer, though in this case it's to more safely and quickly clear hordes with. The reason you don't want additional stamina on your hammers is because you'll also get stamina on your necklace, and going over the 4 stamina total doesn't help you a whole lot, as stamina is shared between weapons, meaning that even if you have, say, 8 stamina and lose 4 stamina, so 50%, that still means you've lost 100% of your stamina the moment you swap to dual axes. You also got an ultimate on an incredibly short cooldown, which is almost always the safest way to confirm a revive. So in the rare scenario in which 4 stamina isn't enough to block regular horde minions, you will generally be able to leap away, avoiding these stamina breaking attacks. Moving on to said necklace, you will want to get +2 stamina, increasing your stamina totals on both your axe and hammer to 4. A very respectable number for blocking on the Slayer, and secondly you'll get player health, which due to Oblivious to Pain counts for more than most other classes would get out of this. And unlike damage reduction, it isn't specific to any kind of enemy, though getting any type of damage reduction is more than fair too. For the trait, you want to get Blessing of Shalia, which grants a 30% heal increase, which means you will gain more temporary HP and is the most consistent safety upgrade you can pick. We then get to the charm, and here you'll want to get attack speed and power versus chaos. 10% power versus chaos is enough to hit a new kill cutoff point on the basic chaos minions in hordes when you have 3 stacks of your passive, very likely to happen during hordes fights of course. And additionally it helps you against half of the bosses and elites, meaning it's going to give you the most consistent coverage. When using a one-handed hammer, it's less useful since it doesn't change much for hordes, in which case you could also consider power versus monsters, just to focus on more boss damage, as you are most likely spamming light attacks in that scenario. But again, I'd recommend two-handed hammer with power versus chaos on a charm over the one-handed hammer for the aforementioned reasons. Trade-wise, anything goes, it's really just personal preference. I tend to stick with Decanter, giving your potions 50% more duration, which is especially great with speed or strength versus bosses. For the trinket, you want to get curse resistance if you are doing 2 grim runs. In that case, it's by far the best health increase you could get, and secondly, you want crit chance. Trade-wise, you have 2 options. Shrapnel is the best option when dealing with bosses, but I generally recommend Grenadier, as the 25% chance not to use a bomb means you'll have an easier time with patrols especially, which are some of the most dangerous and likely wipe moments on Legend. And with that, we're all up to date on the current state of the Slayer, who is genuinely one of the most useful classes in the game at this moment, so don't be afraid. Go out there, go fulfill your Slayer oath. Thank you for watching, my name's been Haas, and I'll see you in the next video or stream.